the best companies that I've worked on, not only they can have that why and that North Star, and then they can successfully move it to be even more ambitious. And that is something that their teams can rally around.
Welcome to Leaders on a Mission, where we explore the story of innovators really tackling the world's toughest challenges. Now, I'm your host, Simon Leach, and today I'm really excited to speak with Michael Kearney, General Partner at the Engine Ventures, a venture firm really spun out of MIT that's redefining tough tech investing. With 3 funds and over $650 million of, capital under management, the Engine really focuses on, backing groundbreaking companies driving solutions to some of society's biggest problems. And in today's episode, we're going to really dive into the challenges and opportunities across the energy transition and the trends shaping the future of tough tech. And look, Michael, I really appreciate your time coming on today, and look forward to the conversation.
It's great to be here, Simon. Thanks for having me.
That's a pleasure. Tell me what initially maybe we'll take it back a little bit. What initially maybe drew you to the, Engine, and what really excites you most about working in tough tech?
Yeah, so Simon, I'll actually take you back probably quite a bit to the beginning of my career. I did my graduate work at MIT, and it was all focused on, this is in the 2010 time frame. Focus on energy challenges that we face. I was doing research on vehicle electrification and energy storage on the grid. I think that what drew me to the startup or more innovative side of the energy world was the need for pretty significant change over decadal time horizons, and the need to do things differently with business, noting that business as usual was not going to work. So I actually started going into entrepreneurship. I helped launch a grid scale energy storage company in 2010. A really formative experience at that time. There was, in the United States at that time, maybe literally a handful of projects on the grid, 2 or 3, all publicly funded by the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. And figuring out, how do you create a new market? How do you begin to sell a product into that market that had never existed before? And working with customers that our energy customers are highly risk averse, as they should be, because reliability really does matter. It means lives. So navigating through that early in my career was quite formative. I was there. I did that for 5 or 6 years before making the transition over to the Engine when the Engine was getting spun up out of MIT in 2017, and I joined in 18. The challenge at that time, the energy transition and tough tech writ large, looked very different than it does today. I think capital markets were very immature in the space. In fact, 2012 to 2014, capital markets in energy fully receded in clean tech. And it was kind of this understanding that funding hard technology, hardware, tough tech, deep tech, whatever nomenclature you want to use, was not a real fit for the conventional venture capital model that required rapid experimentation cycles often associated with software development. And so MIT asked the question, well, what can we do differently to change this game? And the Engine was a manifestation of work done at MIT out of the president's office by Raphael Rafe to create an institution that would begin to change the way the game was played. And it did it in 3 ways. The first was it created a venture fund with the mandate to support these types of companies with a little bit longer time horizon than traditional venture capital to return capital to its LPs. That's the Engine Ventures. It also created an incubation space. I'm sitting in it here. We have about 300,000 square feet of space where companies can come on day one, right after a PhD student or a postdoc or a company is founded. They can come into the labs and begin their experimentation. And that changes the pace of experimentation in the early days. I can't tell you, when we started the battery company in 2010. It took us one whole year and a lot of money that we don't want to admit, a lot of money just to replicate the results that we had accomplished on lab, in lab on campus, and then get into a startup environment. One whole year. So that doesn't work. So today, if we started that company, it'd be like 3 days. So trying to do that much faster. And then the third kind of leg of the stool is we try to surround these companies with all the stakeholders they need to be successful in the very early days. I think that's particularly important in energy, where you're dealing with lots of different risk profiles. You've got technology risk, scale up risk, regulatory risk, team risk, all those things. You got to begin to have those folks around the companies pretty early. So it was that mission, the mission of changing the way we think about translating breakthrough science and engineering, which is great in and of itself because it furthers the advancement of science, into something that actually creates tangible impact for people across the world. And that's why I got into this side of things and have been here now for the last 7 years or so.
Awesome. No, thank you for that. I mean, it's incredible, really. 2017, I start looking at the profile of the company, the number of investments, the size of capital deployed. I'm feeling and sensing it should be older, it should be around longer. It's like quite an incredible kind of journey in kind of 8 short years with COVID in between.
With COVID in between. I mean, so I think that's a testament to our team. A lot of people putting in a lot of time to do stuff. It's also a testament to the game has changed. And it changed not just because of us. I mean, it changed because a lot of other people recognize this problem. And the problem that things that matter take longer and need capital, but they should still be funded. Because in the fullness of time, they can make enormous impact, both financially and for society writ large. And I think that has been an evolution. COVID played a role in that, right? In terms of changing the way I think people think about these problems and how do we solve them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So where are we on the journey then? I mean, we think about the energy kind of transition, the decarbonization kind of, agenda. Where about are we on this? Yeah,
good question. And I think, in today's media environment, everyone wants to look at what's happening today, what happened yesterday, what's the next thing real fast. But if you just take a step back for just a minute and we look at where we were in the early 2000s and in just 20 years, what we've done. In the early 2000s, there was very little renewable energy on the electricity grid. Electric vehicles Tesla had not yet been created, right? Electric vehicles were a long, back of mind, futuristic thing. We were beginning to think about decarbonizing electricity, but not really. Like natural gas boom. This was the natural gas boom in the United States. Mitchell Energy sold in the early 2000s and Devon Energy, fracking, natural gas prices came way down. This was, it was a time, all this was an afterthought, right? 96% of energy production in the United States, new energy production last year was clean in 2024. 0% of that in 2004. So that's the trajectory that we're on. And solar in particular has outpaced every single projection that even the most aggressive followers, analysts have proposed over the last 10 years or so. Solar costs have declined significantly. Battery costs have declined by order of magnitude. That is incredible. It's actually incredible progress technically, but then more than that, it's the market development that's come with it. We now have proof points of success in vehicle electrification and batteries and power electronics that have come with it. And so that makes it a lot easier to envision what the next 20 years is going to look like as we diversify the set of resources that we are developing and deploying and the curves that those resources could be on. And so if you look out 20 years, we're looking at a wholly different world, similar to if you look back 20 years. And it is almost to the point where if you're not actually thinking about that world, you're really going to miss out on something. And that, I think, is what's really exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. And what does that world look like in 20 years? I mean, you've highlighted, it's unbelievable when you look back to, as you say, 20 years and how far we've come. It's probably difficult to imagine what the next 20 years might look like, but...
I think it's a lot, I actually think it's pretty easy to imagine what it looks like, because the technologies that were under development in the 2000s are now deployed, scaled, and one of them is one of the biggest companies in the world. So...
Which company?
Tesla.
Tesla, yes, of course, yeah.
So I think when you look forward, what are the next set of resources that are going to be deployed in that period of time? Well, I think geothermal, fission are going to get ramped all across the world not for any other reason other than like clean, firm baseload power. Now the demand for that is enormous and growing for the first time in 20 years. With a lot of public support and national competitiveness at its tail, that's going to grow, and it's going to grow fairly rapidly. Now, there are constraints on how quickly that can grow in the next 3-4 years, but I think if you look out 5-10 years, it's significant.
Yeah.
Energy storage, similarly, and then you work back into how do you deploy new grid technology? So high temperature superconductors for transmission. We have a company, Veer, in our portfolio that can take an existing right-of-way, replace the line and then that line can carry 10 times the amount of power as the existing copper lines. So those types of things, and then the supply chain for all of it, minerals, metals, all of that has got to ramp up, I think, commensurate. And so that's an area that we're particularly interested in following here in the next few years, because we are looking at massive supply gaps in the 2030s for all of us. And that is another area where geopolitical constraints are emerging to be quite biting. So we're paying close attention to that. I think that's what the world looks like, though. Those are the technologies that in 20 years will have scaled. And you can bet that there will be a few of the largest companies in the world that are doing those things.
Yeah, no, got it. And you speak about the demand for power, maybe electricity growing for the first time. Give me some context to that and the growth of the market, as it were.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of that is being driven by the power demands required for AI development and compute. So if you think about it, a Google search, the numbers are a Google search requires 0.3 watt hours of electricity, right? A ChatGPT query requires 3 watt hours of electricity, 1-to-1, right? And it's an order of magnitude more. So that's at the query level. You take that and you scale it to the racks, like the chip, and then the racks, and then the actual data centers. And we have data center projections now that are at the per data center level, 1 gigawatt of demand, of electricity demand. 1 gigawatt is enough for just under 1 million homes for a single data center. And then the number of data centers is increasing significantly. The development in the United States, we are going through a construction boom that is on the order of the same that we did for World War II, and it's more than anything ever since. And it's mostly driven by data center builds. And so that is expanding significantly. So we're seeing demand for energy rise. Now, I think there's a few things that's doing. I think the intricacies matter. One is, as a result of that demand going up, the supply curve is also, prices are going up, right? So the prices for solar have actually come up this year because of the demand is high and there are a lot of constraints on the grid. And so we're looking at, I think the average on the data that I saw was about 6 cents a kilowatt hour, up from in some places, depends. But I think the average was about 6 cents. And so there's some friction in how do you expand capacity rapidly. And so we're gonna kind of live through that here in the next. And then the second thing is, a lot of the data centers are built close to their loads where they serve, because latency matters. Latency, how quickly that those data centers can do the work that they're doing. But it's very difficult to continue building near where the demand is. Those are in big cities, and certainly not getting enough power into those places. Getting enough power into those places is hard. So I think we're going to go through a period of time where there's going to be a new equilibrium in the economic geography of data centers and power and load that we're going to kind of see shake out here in the next 5 to 10 years, which will be really interesting. But in aggregate, demand is up. And that is a macroeconomic trend that will keep things moving, I think, here on a go-forward basis. The big question is, what will we use all of the AI for? What is going to be the app that makes all this worth it? And I don't have that answer. I think there's a lot of companies that are doing interesting stuff, and a lot of money is being put in place to serve those, and that is going to play out also in the next 5 years or so.
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned, with the engine, the ventures, and the incubation space. Like when you're investing in your fund, will it always be companies that are coming through the incubation space, or do you kind of go out and invest outside of that as well?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. No, it is not. I think from very early days, we were set up to serve more than just MIT, and I think over time that has grown as we've gotten to know more universities and more academic and industrial research clusters where there's top level research coming out. We've invested all across the United States. We look at deals in many places in Europe as well, in Israel. So and similarly in Southeast Asia. So we have not every single one is in the building here, though a number of them are. And once they get to a certain size, the building doesn't serve them. They move on and have their own space. But it is an option for them.
Yeah, and it sounds like such an exciting space to be with all these startups working together and all this kind of support. It's like an infrastructure kind of support, isn't it? It just sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's the ability to kind of not have to manage your own real estate as an early stage startup is a real luxury. And similarly, like a lot of these companies don't have the balance sheets to spend a lot of money to build out a new lab, and that's not cost effective. It's not where they should be spending their dollars. So the opportunity to be in the space is, I think, quite valuable.
Just talking on that, I was amazed at some visits I've had, mainly to the Bay Area, and what lab space genuinely kind of costs out there. I was absolutely blown away by it. At what point does it make sense for an early stage company to kind of, leave the support structure and then be spending the hard dollars where it comes to kind of real estate and leases and equipment, etc.?
That's going to be idiosyncratic to the firm based on how much money you've raised, the type of work you have to do, the scale of the work that matters. Benchtop stuff, typically if you're doing benchtop stuff in the building, it's fine. But as soon as you've got to build something that can be deployed in some type of industrial setting, you're well out of an incubation space, and you got to go find it. That's not happening in the Bay Area because it's too expensive. I think that's what you see firms go do that elsewhere. And I think probably similarly here in Cambridge, once you got to build something of scale, you've got to get out to places where it makes sense to do that. Yeah,
because it's always like a quandary, isn't it? Because you've got the ecosystem, you've got the talent, right? You've got the people around you that you can really build great teams and companies with, but it's the challenge, the financial kind of challenge of that, isn't it? Really, in this current environment.
Yeah, I think there are some ways teams maintain that culture. One, I think there's heterogeneity in the talent that you need, right? And so, yes, Cambridge is great. Love Cambridge, Silicon Valley. Similarly, if you are a software engineer, great place to be. If you're a manufacturing engineer, maybe not. And actually, a lot of these firms pretty quickly need to get into process engineering, manufacturing, and find those people. And as I think about the energy transition, so kind of, I would say growing up here in Cambridge, Mass, this has been over the last 20 years a place where life sciences have flourished, right? And flourished to the point of you see a lot of movement of the talent pool from big company to small company and back and then back. And that shows a fairly healthy, I think, labor market and also innovation ecosystem. Because what you see is you have talent that is willing to take the perceived risk of going from a big company to a startup, recognizing that perceived risk is not all that real because it's a very fluid market and there's always either another startup or you can go back to the big company, right? So you've got a very healthy ecosystem here for life sciences. We are beginning to see that in clean tech or climate tech. I think that interestingly, it is that moment of time where you switch from being a lab-based company to a manufacturing process engineering company, where this ecosystem needs to lean on other ecosystems for that talent. And so we see a lot of folks hiring from and recruiting to Houston and kind of the Gulf here, because that's where there's a lot of talent. And I think how that matures in the next 5 to 10 years is going to be really important for the field. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, the way you just put it there, thinking about going from lab to scaling manufacturing process in this space, it's a big jump, isn't it? Oh, it's a huge jump. And I think for each company individually, you've got to think about how do you prepare yourself for that jump. And the reality, I think the thing that as I work with companies, try to help navigate is that jump from a talent perspective and like a leadership perspective starts pretty early. Like if you're not designing for manufacturing at the benchtop, that's problematic within a company, different than in academia. I think that's actually one of the big changes between academia and in the startup. You have to be conscious of the process development that will go into how do you scale the technology once you think it works, and having someone who knows those types of things early on is really helpful. Yeah, absolutely. Just a couple of points. I'm thinking, say, when you consider your portfolio companies and you have a look at some of these early stage companies, what problems do you think? What are the major hurdles do you think they're facing today in the beginning of 2025, as it were, that they have to overcome in order to succeed? Yeah, there are many. I'll highlight a couple that are on my mind. The first is always team and being able to recruit and hire outside of your expertise, right? That requires a couple things. One, the humility to know what is your expertise and what is not. And to be able to then go out and recruit someone who's really, really great to join you as a partner. That's really hard to do, and I think, but necessary. As I get into the second challenge, which is we are no longer in the game of technology development and the best technology will win. It is actually now, in many cases, an execution game because the markets are maturing. The capital is available, and so speed matters. And in some ways, as a technology investor, that is something I have to think about all the time, because it is no longer like if I back the right tech, we're in good shape. No, I've got to make sure that they can scale into a market that is maturing very rapidly and do that with pace. And I think that's the second thing. That's a really good problem to have for the industry. As an early stage technology investor, is the thing I'm highly conscious of. Yeah, is that an adjustment that's been difficult to make? Like for you, like with your hat on specifically, in the way that you probably look at tech and really interesting technologies, have you had to really adapt and change that approach? A little bit. I mean, I think, one example is we looked at hydrogen for a very long time. And so much of so we did a whole landscape on what was out there from a technology perspective and the business, what was going on. This is before the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States, which only augmented this challenge for us. But you have electrolyzers, so green hydrogen, focusing on green hydrogen, you have electrolyzers, of which the projected cost reductions in electrolysis, about 75% of those cost reductions are simply a result of the input cost of electricity going into the electrolyzer coming down. So if solar goes down, so does the hydrogen out of the electrolyzer. And if you were making a bet in 2021 or 2020 on electrolysis, you were really making a bet on solar. All the innovative work on new materials, new membranes, all of that, the reality is, I thought it's kind of on the margin from a delivered cost of hydrogen perspective relative to just you're banking on solar costs coming down. And so an execution bet would be on that market. The tech almost doesn't matter. You're going to bet the solar costs are going to come down. At some point, you're going to incentivize hydrogen production, and you can have some real big winners in that way. Good bet. If you're betting on the technology differentiation, harder to do. So what we ended up looking at was, okay, well, what about on the manufacturing and process development side, or on the business model side? Could we think about, are there ways to better capture value in the market? And then and that actually led to our investment in Avolo, which is a stack producer. And so it isn't that we weren't thinking about these things, but we had to look at them a little differently when there's like this, the execution side is ready to go. And the IRA, with the incentives for green hydrogen that they put in, and we'll see where that stands, that just augmented some of those challenges. The game really changed from research and development and develop good tech to go out and execute, build projects as quick as you can.
Yeah, no, got it. No, thank you. Just tell me, like, from an investment viewpoint, I know you'd like to invest early. At what point are you with companies? Are you always involved with follow-up rounds? And at what point do you kind of, are you playing less of a role on the board of a company?
So we try to stick with our companies through the life cycle of those companies, and we try to participate as long as we can. We have the cash to do that, and we try to be value-added partners through each of those phases. I think. So I think the answer to your question is we're there. Right. As long as we can.
Yeah, great. So tell me a little bit more about. If you're partnering or you invest in a company, how are you supporting the founders on that journey? Beyond the kind of infusion of capital, which I get is very important, but tell us a little bit more about that kind of value and that way of supporting and working.
Yeah. So, I think of the work that we do with our founders. We will invest early. We also have a philosophy where we will also invest in technically oriented founders, right? Those who are the inventors of the technology. And we do that because they have a very close tie to the mission of what the technology was meant for. They set that North Star doing the research for it. And we think, and we'll make an investment when we think that they're best suited to go out and push for that North Star. But what that means is that we work, I think, closely with our founders to surround those companies with the infrastructure, the human capital infrastructure necessary for those companies to grow quickly, and to fill in gaps. And all startups have gaps. You just have to identify what they are, and then try to fill them as early as you can with the constraints that you have, and then kind of work through. Bringing on those people. So that's number one, and then two is related is like how do you set up the experimentation cadence for the company, right? I think about startups as they are running experiments themselves. Everything they do is you're de-risking on some lever of the business, and how do you respond to those signals? How do those signals adjust the plan that you have to kind of go forward with, and how do you allocate capital to do that in time, both in kind of within a round of funding, but also how do you think about your experimentation beyond the round of funding that you're in?
Yeah, okay, no, great. That sounds awesome. And tell me, when you're making investments, like, I'm just thinking about maybe when you've got it wrong compared to when you've got it right, and you've invested in a really interesting kind of technology and tech founder. Give me some cues, like when you're making a bad investment or it's gone wrong. What was it about that generally? Is there a common thread around that? And likewise, I was going to ask you about on the making it right. Is there a kind of common thread you see in the entrepreneur that you will see and it will just stand out straight away?
I'm going to focus on the latter, and it's not because we haven't made mistakes, but just because I think actually as we think about making an investment, we look at about 1,000 potential investments a year, and we'll make 6 to 8. And as deeply technical as many of our investments are, at the end of the day, I think most of what we do not invest in is it doesn't work because the team is not prepared to actually build the business that they're excited about. And so we spend a lot of time with founders in advance of an investment. A lot of the work I just described starts well before we make an investment. It's around getting to know the founders, what makes them tick, what are they excited about, what is their vision. And I think if we can align on that, if we agree on that vision, that is a really exciting thing, right? And something that we would want to fund. And then we do the work to figure out, well, what does that have to look like? Like, what do we need to, what do we together need to do over time to build a really impactful business? And I think that is where I think there's 2 things that I look for in that period of time. One is the entrepreneurs who they're working with us, but they're also seeking guidance from every possible resource they can, right? That shows me A, the hustle that they have, and B, that they know how to win because they're going to bring more people around them to solve the problems that they have ahead of them. Those are the 2 things that I think are really, really important. And we look for. And then the X's and Y's of the deal and the company, that all comes, right? But the first part is it is about people.
Yeah, no, great. And just thinking about that journey, I mean, it's a really unique kind of setup, isn't it? That early stage environment, with the founder and the team and everyone's kind of engaged and you can just feel it, can't you, right? I mean, there's just kind of everyone working together. It's like, it's just an incredible environment, isn't it?
When it's working right.
When it's working
exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
But when it comes to that scale and growth, and I'm thinking you've been involved with lots of companies, around this. Things have to change, right? And I really want to kind of dial in and understand your thoughts around kind of culture. And when I think about gold standard of culture and what it really takes when you're going through your company is growing 100, 200, 300 people, how you kind of maintain that culture as a kind of part of that founding team, as it were.
Yeah. So I think there's a few ways I think about this through a couple lenses. One is the startup world, you're doubling your team like every 3-4 months. Like once you start, like when you actually start, you go from 2 to 4, 4 to 8, 8 to 16. And each time you double your team, there are more new people in the firm than old. And so how do you maintain that culture through that is a real challenge. The companies that I've seen and the leaders that I've seen do that well, they strictly adhere to the vision that they set from day one and the values that they embed in how you go about executing to that vision, the why of existence. And so when I work with my companies, the why of existence is actually the first slide in every board meeting. Why are we here? And if that changes, it's a big thing to talk about. And it does change, because the best companies that I've worked on, not only they can have that why and that North Star, and then they can successfully move it to be even more ambitious. And that is something that their teams can rally around. And it's a very different mode when you are rallying to a purpose. Then it's more aspirational. Everybody who comes to work with an aspirational mentality, then their job is to do X, Y, or Z, and it's kind of manipulative, right? Like, you get paid to do X, go do X. When you have the vision of where you want these teams to go, and they know where to go, that is something that is it pervades across time and organizational doublings, and I think is the thing that has, I think, held a lot of the companies in our portfolio and not in our portfolio, big companies and small companies together.
Yeah, no, great. And does that help with that vision and the values and the purpose? Because I now start thinking about behavior and the way communication takes place and the way decisions get taken and the way it really feels to be part of that company. How important is that aspect that ties in with the kind of why and the values, as it were?
There's culture is not the job of any one person, right? Culture is actually everybody's job. And yes, vision and values are set, but they're meaningless if people don't buy in. And you can't credibly get people to buy in if you don't communicate what those things are. And importantly, how everybody's work directly relates to those. And so communication is absolutely critical. In a world where people don't understand the importance of their work, they're going to be demotivated. They're not going to come to work. That spirals out of control. And communication channels are absolutely critical for that. I think the main challenge for startups is because startups have the benefit of being able to move fast. Less structure allows you to change course and pivot and move and be agile, and that's really good. And that requires really important communication. At some point, you're going to need those layers. As your team grows, you have to add in those layers, and making sure that those layers it's not a negative game of telephone about why we are doing things. It's a real challenge for teams as they scale.
Yeah. No, got it. And listen, it's also a challenging and can be a really lonely time being a founder of a company. And I'm wondering, because your website and information about you guys, it's really, there's a lot of great stuff about you and about your descriptions about companies and your reports about the markets. And I'm wondering, is there, outside of the incubation space, when you're growing, is there almost that opportunity for founders and CEOs to how do you see them being able to kind of get support emotionally in tough times, within your framework?
So I think getting CEO networks are really important for that reason. We try to cultivate some of that. We actually do that in advance of an investment. Try to connect CEOs with folks at our portfolio, working on similar things, going through similar times, that sort of thing. And many of them self-select into that, and we'll find those networks and those support structures. I think having a deep bench of advisors who've kind of been there, done that, and seen stuff is another mechanism for that. And then it's a very human game. Right, you have everyone you're working with is part of it, and at least I think we all try to make sure that we're there for everyone when things are in hard times and good times.
Yeah, no, great, absolutely. And just tell me, like, I mean, I get a sense, but I'll ask you directly, what's the best thing about your job?
Every single day, it's inspiring to see and meet people who have both the ability and the desire to change the world and make it a better place.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, great. And look, Michael, love the conversation with you today. Thanks so much for coming on and sharing your insights and the impactful work that you're doing. And it's great to learn kind of more about that path and about some of your kind of views and thoughts on the future and the work that the Engine are doing and Engine Ventures. So really appreciate it, and like wishing you a brilliant 2025.
Thanks so much, Simon. I appreciate you having me on.
No, that's a pleasure. And so thanks to all our guests and our listeners for kind of tuning in. And thanks for joining us, and stay tuned. We'll see you next time.